Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Strong Talk. I'm Rachel Quednau, host from Strong Towns, and we have three fantastic guests that are joining us today. The topic for today is building for residents versus tourists, and how do you balance the needs of those different communities? And this was inspired by an article written by one of our members, Arian Horbovetz, who is on this call right now. So I'll ask him to summarize that article in just a minute, but first I want to introduce everyone. So the first person we have is Kate Durio. She is from Lafayette, Louisiana, and she works for the Lafayette Consolidated Government, helping to revitalize Lafayette's downtown. She also previously served as Director of Marketing and Events for Downtown Lafayette. Then we have Jonathan Holth of Grand Forks, North Dakota. Is that where you actually live? I never can remember the difference between Grand Forks, Barbara. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I live in Grand Forks.
He's a Strong Towns member, and he's the new president and CEO of Downtown Community Partnership in Fargo, North Dakota. And he's also co-owner of 3 awesome restaurants that are in that area. And finally, we have Arian Horbovetz of Rochester, New York. He is another Strong Towns member, photographer and blogger at theurbanphoenix.com. And he's written a couple articles recently on this topic of residents versus tourists. So Arian, can we start with you and just tell us about that article you wrote a couple weeks ago, The Big Urban Mistake, Building for Tourism versus Livability?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I wrote the article because I travel across upstate New York. And for those who don't live around New York, that doesn't include New York City. It's much smaller cities across the upstate. Basically, I've told the story of urban rebirth happening in our Rust Belt cities, in our upstate New York cities, ranging for anywhere from 10,000 in population to 250,000, like in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, things like that. And, it was kind of interesting. I've over the last few years, I've kind of had the pleasure of telling that story of urban rebirth and revitalization. And so much of that revitalization in these cities is based around strong local movements. So, a restaurant will take a risk, high-end restaurant, a farm-to-table restaurant, and move into an emerging neighborhood. A craft brewery will move into an area that has been rough or vacant for a long time, and the community supports it, and the other businesses join in and say, hey, this is working for these folks, and they're kind of those initial kind of risks that people are taking, whether they're business owners or people that are patronizing those places, are taking that initial risk to move into their long vacant downtowns and support what's there, the new stuff that's coming in. And that's where the movement starts. And then there's downtown housing. It's formerly nearly condemned buildings being turned into lofts. And there's this energy in all these cities that nobody really, if you're living outside these cities, necessarily knows what's going on. So I've basically been, telling that story for a few years now. What I find is that often it gets to the point where people say, hey, our downtown is back. We're excited about what's happening here. We're really, really psyched about what's going on. But then suddenly there's always this point where outside investors, big money investors, developers, and local government kind of want to put their stamp on it, whether it's financial stamp or a political, stamp. Eventually you'll open up your newspaper if you're one of these towns, or pull up the internet, and you'll find one day, hey, this $100 million project is suddenly being proposed downtown that, by the way, really doesn't necessarily benefit the people living there. It could be anything. That's a casino thing is so big here. Every city kind of is toying with the idea of a casino, and you sit there and go, no. Things, for example, in my own city of Rochester, we have this great open space right downtown. We call it Parcel 5. And it's this wonderful space where it's right smack in the middle of the city. It's at the old location of an old urban mall. And it's a great place. They've had some concerts there and things like that. And the city just spills out in front of you. It's one of the best places in Rochester. The residents that are moved downtown have very strongly supported a public space being created there. As of now, it's just gravel. And we were really kind of trying to support this public space because we feel like it's a place that could really bring the city together. And it's a space very much like Bryant Park that would be a wonderful resource for the city as far as livability. And what came out was that Rochester wants to move in the direction of putting a performing arts center and more housing down there, and high-end, of course, housing. And while that doesn't sound like a bad idea, and it's not necessarily the worst idea in the world, it's not something that's going to benefit the people that have taken the risk, that have taken that leap to move down there. They're looking for more livable options. And what this is going to do is this is going to be more for the folks in the very wealthy outer suburbs to come in and have their city experience and go home. And my point is
garage.
Exactly. And this is something that, park underneath the street, and that's going to be the way that goes. And it's a shame, because the people that are moving downtown, there's 20 some residential projects currently either completed or being completed in Rochester's downtown in their center city. And unfortunately, it's kind of sending a message to these folks saying, thanks, we'll take it from here. It's very difficult for the people that have taken that risk to say, this is kind of what we want, but we don't feel like our voices are being heard. And I'm seeing this in a lot of cities where this is happening. So that's what kind of that was my inspiration for writing that piece. And it really hit home with a lot of people. I've heard from people all over the country that are dealing with the same issues. And I realize this is really a commonality among kind of emerging cities.
Yeah, I think, another factor with the Performing Arts Center is also that that's probably going to be funded by a whole lot of government money and or debt, when you could focus on more small scale investments, smaller
incremental growth. Yes.
Yeah. And businesses and things like that, which I'm guessing would, maybe benefit both residents and tourists. Kate and Jonathan, maybe Kate, let's start with you. What is your reaction to reading this article and this tension between tourists versus residents?
Well, I think in Lafayette, we're very unique in a way that we don't have to struggle for who our community identity is. We're the place where Cajuns and Creoles are. We have a kind of indigenous culture here. It's very genuine. It's very authentic. So we know who we are, but someone described it to me the other day, and I thought this was perfect. It's like we've built a Ferrari, but we're driving it like a mama. We haven't fully maximized our potential as a culturally branded community, both from a tourism perspective, but also from a residential livable community perspective. We've built this tourism industry that's actually the second largest economic driver in our community.
Oh, wow.
By accident. It's been very organic versus strategic. And so what that looks like in our built environment is that people come here and they love the people. They love the experiences that they have, but our built environment is no way a reflection of who we are. And we do not provide enough opportunities for tourists who come here to fully immerse themselves into our culture. And so we struggle like everywhere. If I, dropped you off at the corner of two main streets in our community, you would have no idea where you were. And that's really unfortunate. And so in a way to try to start to be more strategic and thoughtful and intentional in how our community better can reflect our culture, the mayor launched this initiative called CREATE, which is a cultural economy initiative, meaning culture, recreation, entertainment, arts, tourism, economy. And now that's my job 3 months in to try to figure out how all of these things touch each other, and how if we don't get all of them right, we're not going to have that immersive experience. So from my background as a placemaker and someone who loves downtowns and cities, I think that it's my job to connect those dots for people. So when we think about tourism for people coming into Lafayette, we need to be thinking about what they see when they get to the airport and how they get from their airport to where they're staying and where they're staying and what their hotel feels and looks like and where that hotel is located. And we have so much culture here and so many cultural events, and we're like the home of the free live music festivals in Lafayette. But we are competing so much with each other that we're kind of cannibalizing ourselves. And we don't do a good job of allowing more accidental discoveries of our culture. It's more like you have to know to go, you have to know where that is. And so that's just something that I think we need to do a better job of connecting. So we're really at a moment, I think, especially as it relates to our downtown development, where we're like in the middle of that whole area, where like we're right at the cusp of getting it right or getting it really wrong. And so I think that if we can't get our built environment to work the right way in the downtown area, then we really have no hope for the outlying areas. So that's kind of where my focus is. And I credit to the mayor for having that vision to understand that important connection. But it's a journey, it's an educational journey, right? Of how all these things matter to each other.
Jonathan, what's your reaction to this tension? I know, both in your new position, working in downtown Fargo, and also your experience as a restaurant owner. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
It's interesting, taking off of Kate's comments about like community identity, because I think in North Dakota, in Grand Forks and in Fargo, we've struggled with that for a long time about who we are. And I think we also have spent a lot of time trying to overcome stereotypes about North Dakota and, Fargo the movie, and is that what people are really like up there, and things like that. Everybody assumes, that it's freezing all the time. And so I think we've worked hard to overcome some of those stereotypes. And I've worked in restaurants my entire adult life. And one of the things that's interesting for me is I get to have direct dialogue with tourists and with residents on a nightly basis about why they're in our cities and what they're doing while they're here. And we've had this discussion a lot in master planning efforts, both in Fargo and Grand Forks, about how we should do this. Should we plan for residents? Should we plan for tourists? Should we try to balance? But what we've found is that in Fargo and in Grand Forks, they're smaller cities. So we find that the tourists that are coming here are sort of a specific type of tourists that are craving authenticity. So the people that come to Fargo and sit down at the bar at one of my restaurants, usually, the first thing that they ask for is they want a local beer. So just kind of having that almost nightly case study, we know that by sort of building Fargo for Fargoans and doing the same thing in Grand Forks, that the tourists that are coming to visit our cities, that's what they're looking for. They're looking, we don't have people in New York City that are trying to decide, okay, where should we go on vacation? Well, let's pack up the family and head to Fargo. What we have is regional visitors that know that they can, drive for half a day and get and experience something different than what they're getting in their city. So I think we here have more recently tried to focus on, okay, let's build the strongest city that we can for our residents, knowing that the tourists will appreciate that. And that's what they're coming here for. A lot of our tourism that we get, especially in Grand Forks, is people that live in Winnipeg that are just driving down for the day. So we're getting Canadian visitors that live in a much larger city that are just kind of getting away for a day. So they don't necessarily want the massive buildings and the things that they see in their city on a daily basis. They're looking for the fun little neighborhoods and cool little restaurants and shops that they don't have in their city. So I think just through a realization over the past few years, we've come to realize up here that let's be unique to Grand Forks and Fargo and who we are. That's not to say that we don't have tension. Right now I'm taking a break. We're in the middle of a street fair in downtown Fargo, which brings 140,000 people approximately in 3 days to the streets of downtown Fargo. And and it closes off, we close off a dozen blocks, and the street fair is 40 years old, and it was initially implemented to try to bring people into the downtown area when downtown wasn't doing well. So let's get people down here. Well, now downtown's doing really well. So now we have this tension of, during the street fair, it's not that accessible for parking. And so some of the businesses say, look, my regular customers can't get down here. So this street fair is really damaging to my business. Other businesses take advantage of it and move their businesses out onto the sidewalk and have all this foot traffic. So it's this I'll call it a healthy tension and healthy discussion that kind of goes on every year around this. So it's not that, I would say here, it's not that we don't have any of these tensions regarding tourism versus residents. We have some of it with events like this, but for the most part, I think we've recognized in this region with smaller cities that we just need to be as authentic as possible, and that the tourists crave that when they come to visit our cities.
Yeah. Kate, I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about, like, for instance, if a tourist shows up and you just plop them down in the middle of two streets, they're not going to know where to go. And that makes me think of, like, you know, wayfinding signs are like a very simple, low-cost way to help tourists and residents, frankly, find their way. Are there any other, like, small-scale things that would help out tourists but that aren't, you know, a huge casino?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, I was laughing when you were talking about the street fair, Jonathan, because, you know, we have an international music festival every April, and I've started to see it as the greatest tactical urbanism project of all time, because for 5 days, we have a free international music, food, dance festival in the heart of downtown Lafayette. Every surface parking lot, every street storefront, everything is activated and at the street. And it is like, so it's easy for me to make a case to residents about, we could have this all the time. Like, we could feel this way about our community all of the time. And people walk around and they'll say, like, happy festival, like Merry Christmas. It's like,
That's awesome.
and so and people like have festival outfits that they only wear once a year. It's just like, it's a big thing. But, you know, that to me is kind of what I try to balance, because there is a danger in the Disneyfication of that, and in the losing or the boiling down to being irrecognizable of the culture that's here. And we have a tendency to do a come and go kind of culture. In the same way that 5-day festival comes and goes, there's no sustainability of, like, well, what do you do the rest of the year that is, and we have lots of other music festivals, and I don't mean to say that we don't have anything else going on. We have a ton of stuff going on, but I think that's also our strength and our weakness, in our community at least, because we need to do a better job of connecting that livability with the tourism. And to answer your question, Rachel, I think that comes down to what I'm focusing on now is really small grain improvements that we can make. So things like litter cleaning up, and things like good lighting, and things like gateways from our main, we have 2 interstates that intersect in our community. Just better signage and better directional, and even like a master events calendar that everybody's on and using instead of competing with each other. That's all like the smaller stuff that I think we could do a better job of. But I'm also kind of interested in the multifaceted cultural identity of our community, because while our tourism office does a great job of getting people from outside of the market to Lafayette on the basis that we're the home of the Ragin' Cajuns College, and they have the Cajun Dome, but you know, Cajun also is a very white Catholic culture. And when you are not white and Catholic, then where do you fit in, and who's promoting you? And so I think that it's our job here to, on a local level, do a better job of communicating that we are a bunch of different cultures in the same place. And we wouldn't have this culture if it wasn't for this multicultural experience that we share. And so from a perspective of improving on these small grain things, I think that while our tourism office can spend so much money advertising, nothing is more powerful, and he's even told me this, there's nothing more powerful than building a city where you have ambassadors of your residents, right? So like, when I visit my friends, you know, in Portland, Oregon, where I used to live, I want to come where you are because you make it seem so awesome. And so, but I know what to put out there, right? I think that if we could do a better job of improving the lives of residents, no matter how small, then I think we could create our entire citizenship of ambassadors promoting our community, which goes a lot farther.
Yeah, it's interesting that you guys have brought up street festivals, because that's also a huge thing in my city, Milwaukee. Like, we have a different festival going on every week. I think it's probably because it's so cold and horrible the rest of the year that you gotta just soak up every moment of the summertime.
We
But
have the
yeah,
same
like-
thing.
Yeah, I was just
I
at
understand.
one last
We
night.
avoid when it's too hot. Like there's nothing going on right now.
Yeah, that's a balance. But yeah, I was at one last night. It was for Bastille days, which I don't really know why we celebrate that here because there's not a lot of French people, but it's an excuse to eat croissants and stuff. And there were, I went with a bunch of my friends who all live here, but there's also clearly just from listening to people talk, there were clearly people from all over the area. Probably people would come in and stay at hotels just to go to this thing. So that sort of thing is, can be really good for everyone, tourists and residents.
Sure.
I think it's
It's
interesting
really
that we
like
have.
a reset button for our community.
Yeah, go ahead, Kate. Yeah.
Well, it's like a reset button every year that you're like, you might have, the rest of the year might feel like you're like, oh, I don't know about this place. But then you go to festival for 5 days and you're like, this place is awesome. Like, I never want to leave. I love this. So I'm glad that we have that opportunity every year to say, let's fall in love with this place again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting that we've got business owners. We have Kate, you used to work at nonprofit. Jonathan, is your current job technically a nonprofit or?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
It is.
And then Arian, a resident who really cares and is interested in this. I think there's probably, we're coming from different perspectives on this.
It's interesting. I want to touch real quick on something that both Jonathan and Kate said, talking about citizens being ambassadors. And that's something that I found is, in the places that I visited, the many cities, the dozens of cities in, upstate New York that I visited, the dozens of communities, I should say, that I visited, there's always at least one person, usually it's more than one, but there's always somebody says, you got to get in touch with this person. And it's not somebody in local government. It's not somebody in the tourism office. It's not somebody that has any, official position or title. For example, when I went to Schenectady, New York, I love to tell this story. Somebody put me in touch with a woman named Kelly, a young woman named Kelly Marr. And she she was so upset that people were trashing her city. She started an Instagram account called Schenectady Doesn't Suck. And,
Nice.
and it organically, she just had thousands of followers. And so she was my contact when I traveled to Schenectady about, what to do and where to go. And, so I was like, I want to check this out. I don't, all I've heard is negative things about this city. She said, no, here's what you got to check out and you'll love it. And she's done this for countless other people. And these are the people that make a difference. I went there. I had a wonderful time. I launched the blog. It had 20,000 views the first day. And, I was able to provide a tremendous amount of exposure for Schenectady and talk about the good things happening there because of this one person, this one resident who was so happy to be there and was so happy that things are going on there. That one person had an effect that literally rippled across the state. And, I get to be kind of the sounding, the megaphone for folks like these. But in every city I visit, I see that. So, when I talk about planning for, building your city around your residents, around your city, those are your best, that's your best visitors association. That's your best marketing tool is people who live there and people who are addicted to the lifestyle that city brings. Here in Rochester, my friend Steve Vogt is the same thing. He loves to introduce both local, folks here and people from outside and show them all the best parts of the city. And there's countless other people that are doing that too. There's no better, and like Jonathan said, more genuine kind of ambassadors or tour guides than the people that live there. And I think that's why we have to continue to take care of our residents and listen to them and make sure that they're comfortable in a livable environment in our cities.
I think it's the most sustainable thing you could do too, right?
Absolutely. It doesn't cost anything.
Right. Well, it can cost.
It does. Yes.
But I think and now as a government employee, like there's a big part of my job that feels like I need to be listening to what citizens want and need. And so by starting to address things that they care about, like trash and, those kinds of things is helpful in answering that need too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that especially rings true. I think all of us live in cities that are not like in the top 10 tourist destinations in America. They're like random small towns and mid-sized cities that you're not going to, probably get on a plane to visit, but tourists, that live 20 minutes away, 2 hours away, they need us as ambassadors to attract them for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but does anyone have any closing thoughts on this conversation or things to think about as we move forward?
I was going to say, I think, I truly believe that I think that when you create cities for residents, I think other people want to go there. And you think about the places you want to go, what do you want to see? You want to see happy, healthy, thriving people. You want to see beautification. You want to see simplicity. And we're not talking about, when we're talking about cities and urban areas, I think, the thing is, we're not talking about skyscrapers. And I think, in the cities that I'm visiting, I think that's still the perception is that we are building, we're looking to revive our downtowns and make them New York or Las Vegas. And nothing against New York and Las Vegas, they're wonderful places. But most of, like you said, Rachel, most of the people who are going to come visit our places or live in our cities are there for a different reason. And I think we have to recognize that building for a comfortable space does, simultaneously benefits residents and visitors who want to come, and all they want to do is see a beautiful, vibrant culture and maybe a couple things to do. And finding that balance, like everybody's talking about, I think is such an important thing.
Yeah, and having that authentic culture that really represents your place instead of
absolutely
just,
got to come to Rochester and get a garbage plate. It's an amazing thing. Look it up.
I'll just tag off of two, what Aaron was just talking about too, in terms of ambassadors for the city. I think that that's one thing that we focused on in Fargo and in Grand Forks, is getting our residents to be involved and to love their city, knowing that has, a spiderweb effect in terms of how tourists feel that. So, if you walk the streets of downtown Fargo, you'll see a lot of people from Fargo wearing Fargo t-shirts and being very proud of that. If you do a search on Twitter, if you look at my Twitter handle, it's John from Forks, because I'm from Grand Forks. If you do a Twitter search of people that say so-and-so from Fargo, there's a bunch of people, nice. So we try to take pride in what we do, knowing that tourists recognize that when they come here.
Absolutely.
We throw welcome parties in Fargo every few months for people that just moved to the area. Work with the Realtors Association.
That's awesome.
Welcome to Fargo. What are you interested in? Let me connect you to this person, this person, this person. So we're trying to make people ambassadors from the time they move here, and want to call this their home. So I think those sort of grassroots efforts that don't really cost anything, can go just a long way into sort of creating that authenticity that tourists crave when they come visit your city.
And if I just real quick might follow up on that, I travel often to Utica, New York, and it's a place where if you ask other people in upstate New York, they say there's nothing there. The fact is, like you said, you cannot walk down the street without somebody wearing a Saranac Brewery, which is in Utica, shirt, or their local brewery, their local hockey team, gear, or I Love Utica shirts, or something like that. The pride that is there is palpable, and it's addicting. It really is. It's amazing. And as soon as I stepped foot in this place, I said, you know what? This is it's a transitioning city, and they're doing some wonderful things, but it's because so much of that is because there's so much pride there. And immediately as an outsider, I could see that. And that struck a real strong chord with me more than anything.
Yeah. Fantastic.
We're fighting a little bit of appropriation of our culture to places like New Orleans.
Yeah, sure. I bet.
And, like when I love this question, and it's like, when someone asks me, why do you live in Lafayette and not New Orleans? Or like, why don't you live in New Orleans? Because Lafayette is so awesome. It's, that's really what you come to expect when you go to New Orleans, really. For Cajun culture, it's not really in New Orleans, it's here. This is where the Acadians settled after the big kick out of Acadie. They had Le Grand Dérangement. And so, we have a high Francophone, we have more French speakers in Lafayette than New Orleans has.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that.
Wow.
So that's And that's something we've invested in. And so we're kind of starting to think about cheeky things to do, like in the center of New Orleans, which is one of the top 10 tourist destinations in the country.
Mhm.
We're talking about taking over Lafayette Square, the center of downtown New Orleans, and doing kind of this thing of like, if you think you're having fun here, you should come just 2 hours west to Lafayette.
That's a good idea.
And
That's
really
cool.
get what you're seeking. So that's all fun, but it's also a little bit interesting just to see that we haven't done a good job of making use of that as much as other places have.
Well, thank you guys so much for participating in this conversation and for all your work that you're doing to improve all of your downtowns. And yeah, appreciate you guys being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Rest
you.
of your Friday.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.